We are live on YouTube.
Thank you.
So who needs to be a co-host so they can put something on the screen? Ed?
Ed's going to run the first part.
Okay, so Ed is now a co-host.
And then later on, I'll probably jump in there because Barry's got his presentation as part of Ed's. So.
Oh, okay. So Vince, I've got you as a co-host now.
I'll just
And then
run Barry so we don't have to switch it up when we make that change.
Okay. Does Patrick have his own then?
No. Well,
No.
I don't know. Unless Vince has him doing something I'm not aware of.
What's that?
Unless you have Patrick doing something that I'm not aware of tonight.
No, not right now. If need be, we can have him pop in real quick. But I think his will mostly be verbal if there's explanation with the project.
Okay, that's great. Well, just let me know if I need to add anybody. But right now I've added you, Vince, and Ed.
Okay.
All right, I have 6 o'clock, so.
Yeah, so do I. I see Councilwoman's not here, but I just checked my messages and phones as well. I don't have a message, so I'm sure that she'll be joining us shortly.
I don't see anything either.
Right, but we'll stay on time here for 6 o'clock at this time. Call the City Council work session meeting to order. Clerk, if you'd call the roll.
And just a reminder, let us know where you are taking this meeting from. Councilperson Vining, Germaini,
Present, City of Monroe.
Lamore,
Here, City of Monroe.
Felder,
Present, City of Monroe.
Whitman,
Here, City of Monroe.
Angeli,
Present, City of Monroe.
and Mayor Clark.
Present in the City of Monroe. Clerk.
Right, and Clerk Treasurer, I'm here in the City of Monroe.
Excellent, thank you. So this is our work session agenda regarding a couple presentations. We're going to start with the proposed fiscal year 2021-22 budget. Mr. Pastu.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think Ed will pop up the PowerPoint presentation, and we're probably going to go through the proposed budget this year probably quicker than we usually do. A lot of the proposed budget does not have many changes from what the current funding is as it pertains to positions, but there are a few things out there that we'll need to discuss. So as we go through it, but again, it won't have the detail of what we have. And if you have more questions, we can certainly follow up as if not tonight, at a subsequent meeting as we present it. The intent is to do the introduction tonight. We do have scheduled for the April 5th meeting, the introduction of the ordinance, first reading and scheduling of the public hearing. And then ultimately we would look to have it adopted at the April 19th meeting. But, you know, as I said, it's just there's, you know, pretty consistent with the budget, and that'll go through some of the highlights, but we're not looking at any major changes. We've spent a great deal of time since December, particularly after the voters approved the street millage that can also be used for sidewalks and trails. And so we've spent a lot of time focusing on that to get those projects underway for this year. But operationally, there's not a whole lot of changes that we will be going through. Ed's got up there the listing of, you know, just the general overview, talk about the DTE taxable value. The focus will be longer term down the road. Within 3 years, we start running into some operating deficits. Refuge millage, we'll talk a little bit about that. The parking ordinance fines, give you an update on where we're at with the parking fund. New millage proposal, obviously the roads, capital improvements budget, utility rates, of which we're not looking for any changes in the water or sewer. Barry will cover that briefly. And then the American Recovery Act, will have that as the second part of our discussion after we review the proposed budget. So with that, Mr. Stahl, if you want to jump into it.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. I think like Vince said, this is a shortened up version with a little less detail. Didn't want to talk for over an hour on Zoom again this year. So, and like you said, I think a lot of what we've talked about in the past, when you get into the details, is pretty much the same as it has been in previous years. But I'll get into some of the information with you. I did send out a couple documents this afternoon via email. One of them was just kind of the front part of what we normally put in the budget document, and it included what the proposed budget ordinance will be. So you've got that in there, and then you've got some supporting schedules for the general fund. There's a summary schedule and some detailed schedules for revenue and expenditures. And then there's a personnel classification, I call it a budgeted positions report, that's in there as well. And then also a summary schedule of the capital improvements program. So that's in one of the documents. And then the other document was just a line item report of all the non-general fund budgets. So what you'll find in that is for each fund, you'll see a page for the revenues, you'll see a page for the expenditures, and a lot of times that goes into multiple pages. But and then you'll see at the end, you'll see where the fund balance is planned to be for the other funds. We're looking at a 3-year projection. For the general fund, we did project it out over 5 years. So when you see those other fund reports, you will only see 3 years. But that's what I emailed out to you this afternoon. As far as some highlights of what's in the budget, you know, obviously we've got the DTE settlement that we're implementing, and for the general fund, it takes it out to the last year of the settlement. So after that, there's no settlement in place, and we'll have to decide what to do with that next year. But as of now, all the years that were included in the settlement fit into this 5-year budget projection for the general fund. The fund balances are adequate for primary funds. We do still have, you know, because of the DTE appeal, we did have set aside $2.2 million in a kind of a budget stabilization assignment in our fund balance for the general fund, and that still is there. And there's a slide where we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on here. Pension and retiree healthcare are both adequately funded. In fact, retiree healthcare is getting to the point where it's so well funded that we don't really have for the general fund at least, we don't really have a contribution budgeted for this projection period, or this budget period. We're going through the process right now of getting the information to the actuary to do the next actuarial evaluation for the retiree healthcare system, and that will hopefully prove that out for us. But with the change to Medicare Advantage for the over 65 retirees and the good investment results we had this year. Hopefully that our expectations is what we'll see there. There is a new fund added for the millage, the new road, I call it road, etc. millage, road, pathways, sidewalks. That will basically be a feeder for the other funds. So the millage money will go into that fund, but then and then it's going to be called the Municipal Street Fund. It's actually in the Department of Treasury's chart of accounts that's the type of fund that needs to be used for the millage. But really it'll just hold the funds and then transfer them to either of the major local street funds or the capital projects fund to fund capital projects, and that'll be its primary purpose. Future concerns, obviously DTE taxable value reductions, which is causing a general fund structural deficit. We'll look at that a little bit as we go on here, but then also the operating and parking fund is in the same situation where it's kind of difficult to estimate its revenues right now with the COVID situation and not as many people parking and us not having people out doing enforcement as much as we have in the past. But you know, the fund as projected does stay solvent, but it's just barely solvent at this point with 3 years out. So personnel, in terms of personnel changes, there weren't really any additions or deletions of positions in this budget. So there's some things that we budgeted last year that we didn't end up doing. So that's why we actually are at 182.07 full-time equivalent employees, which is a decrease of 1.25. We budgeted last year for an apprentice electrician in the water department, but didn't end up going forward with that. So that's been removed from the budget. And then we had our downtown development coordinator was moved from full-time to part-time. That's where you get the 0.25. We do have wage increases budgeted throughout the 5-year projection. All bargaining agreements do expire as of the end of this fiscal year. So that'll be something we'll be dealing with shortly here. Some other things that are in the budget, there's $40,000 budgeted for our Heritage Corridor Plan update. There is included in this year's budget is funding for the Winchester sub-area plan that we received proposals on in February. So that is included in the current year budget. I'll talk about CARES Act funding a little bit. We received some CARES Act funding and are expecting to receive more, but when I get to a revenue slide for the general fund, I'll talk about that a little bit more. There's some changes in the assessor's budget to allow for some legal fees for Michigan Tax Tribunal appeals that our new assessor may need help with, and also some additional funding for appraisals that may have been done in-house in the past. So I think in total we're talking at this point about $18,000 that's been added, but actually with the personnel changes, the assessor's budget in total is less than what it was last year. So all in all, it's just a structural change and more than anything at this point. And included in the police department's operating budget there is about around $15,000 in costs for implementing some video surveillance, kind of street video surveillance where they would mount a camera on a pole and be out in the public area, able to do surveillance that way.
Is there any questions with anything here at that point?
Andrew, did you have a question?
Yeah, the Heritage Corridor expenditure. I anticipate, is that a land acquisition or what are we doing there? I thought primarily that was being funded by the separate fund that's overseen by the advisory committee.
Well, we put this in here to update the plan itself. I think it was originally done almost 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. And there's been a number of changes, a lot of changes actually. And so the sense of administration is it's time. And I think also the advisory committee it's time to take another look at that. And if there's any amendments that need to be made, it would be done, in a thoughtful public process. So.
Okay.
Okay. I don't see any other questions. Okay. Ed?
Okay. So now we'll get into some of the numbers here. This is just a very summarized look at the general fund and where it's at right now. So what you've got is, you start the first column, you've got the current budget as it's amended. And then you've got the second column is what we are going to be amending the budget to. And then you've got 5 years of projections for the general fund, with the first year there being what you're being requested to adopt as the budget for next year. So the 2021 budget looks a little bit high because we're still working through the DNR trust fund grant. There's about $1.8 million in revenue in there compared to the 2021-22 column. So that's why you'll see some increases there. Some of the items I have highlighted there are ones I wanted to point out. Property taxes, you can see that it's pretty flat or declining through the years, which is not good when that makes up over 70% of our revenue in the general fund. So that shows the need. While where Vince was talking about, we are starting to see problems in the fourth and fifth year there. That's the reason why we just don't have the revenue growth to keep up with increased expenditures. I highlighted that federal grants amount. There's a number of things going on there. The biggest one is the state offered what's called a public safety, public health payroll reimbursement grant back probably early last summer, I guess it was. And we were required to submit if we wanted the money, we were required to submit our payroll for our police and firefighters for April and May. We submitted a request for a little over $1 million, but because of the requests throughout the state, there wasn't going to be enough to fund that in total. We're going to get a prorated amount, but as of today, we still don't know what that final prorated amount is. We received a 50% payment back in the fall, which is about a little over $500,000. In December, the Department of Treasury published a document that said we should get in the neighborhood of $690,000 in total. But as of today, they're still going through with it being federal funds that were paid to them that they're passing to us as a subrecipient. They're still going through the process of monitoring the program and determining what the final payments will be for each entity. So I do have $690,000 included in that number to come from that source. That money at this point is budgeted to go to the capital projects fund, so it doesn't really affect our operations if we don't get it, but that is what's in that number right now. There's also the hazard pay payment we received for the police and firefighters of $56,000. That's in that number. And then we received what's called a revenue sharing replacement payment also, which was about $82,000, which is in that number. So those, and then there's a smaller grant that we received from the police department for some technology that's in there as well. So all of those together make up that number at this point. State shared revenues, that state line looks a little different because it goes up and down through the years. This year, like I said, we've got about 1.8 million in there for the DNR trust fund grant. So that's why it's much higher than in other years. But we also budgeted an additional around $500,000 for the personal property tax reimbursement in that number, which was, if we get it, is supposed to go towards the funding of the St. Mary's Garden Storm Sewer project. We haven't spent it yet, haven't come close to spending it yet, but that's the way it's budgeted, is to be allocated to that project. And then in 2022-23, there's about an additional $400,000 there, because with the DNR trust fund grant, when we get reimbursed for those property purchases that we make, there was always a 10% holdback. And those 10% holdbacks have amounted to around $400,000. So at some point we'll get reimbursed that money, and just at this point, guessing that it will be 2 years out, but that's why that number is a little bit higher there. The rest of the revenue line items are pretty similar to what they've been in the past. Investment income is way down because of very low interest rates. But hopefully in the by 23, 24, that'll start to pick up, and that's what's projected here. So this slide then takes that revenue and kind of shows you what the biggest funding sources are for the general fund. And if you see two columns there. I think I got the column headings wrong there. It should be 2020-21 projected activity and 21-22 requested budget. So I forgot to update the headings, but you know, you can see in the, if you just look at the requested budget column, that the property taxes do make up around 71.5% of the revenue there. Some much smaller items, percentages for the others, but you can see that all those items together make up about 96% of the general fund revenue. This is what our millage rates look like for next year. The economic development millage, we're limited to generating $50,000 there, so there's just a real small increase there, or decrease there, I should say. The refuse millage is up because of the reduction in taxable value and also because of some additional funding set aside for the downtown project that's going on. So that's up, but it's, last year when I did this presentation, we were at about 1.96, so it's not up significantly from what we're projecting last year. The bridge, and then the new millage is the roads, walks, and trails, which is 2 mils. So in total, it's 2.3133 increase from year to year. And also down at the bottom there, I have listed that the LETC millage will be increasing from 0.8178 up to 0.9018. Taxable value in total actually is, if I compare it to just after the border review in 2020 to just after the border review in 2021, the total taxable value is going down about 0.5%, obviously because we're seeing about a $27 million reduction in the DTE power plant taxable value. If you take that out of the equation, taxable value actually would have increased about 3% if we would have just held that flat. So overall, not bad. Just got the one big amount there that's pulling us down a little bit. I'll get into some of the general fund expenditures. This just breaks it down by the budget by function. So you see the functions along the left there, and you see that the budget's increasing. This year projected to be 22,778, but again, that's with the $1.8 million in there for the DNR trust fund grant. But next year, 19.5 million, and then across there is what it's projected to be, increasing in the neighborhood of, you know, around $300,000 each year, and nothing major to point out in terms of what's causing that increase. They're just really cost of living type adjustments, you know, wages and personnel costs go up and those types of things. So nothing new or nothing new that we're budgeting in any of those years. And this then just breaks that down graphically. You know, the yellow part is public safety, so you can see that is making up most of the general fund budget, followed by public works just above it, and then general government's down at the bottom. So that's kind of how the budget breaks down by function. And then this does kind of the same thing we just did with revenue. It kind of shows you what the biggest expenditure amounts are throughout the budget. If you look at the 21-22 requested budget in the right column, it shows about $12 million for personnel costs, which is about 61% of the budget. That is net of what we charge to other funds like the street funds, or any of the other funds, refuse fund, for example. And then you got some of the other amounts there that make up another 19.5%. The rentals are the biggest amount there, I shouldn't say, but a third of that at least is the rent payment we pay to the building authority for the former multi-sports complex, now National Battlefield Park building. So that's what's in that number. I don't know if there's anything else in there to point out specifically, but we got 125,000 budgeted for demolitions. That's what we've been budgeting each year. We do have the additional $12,000 budgeted for the Opportunity Center to be funded by for the labor park programming. So that's included in that city grants amount. And then Yeah,
Ed, I think,
so those items all together are about 19.5 million or 93% of the budget. Yeah, I see John has his hand raised.
Yep. So, John?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Ed, when's the bonds for the former sports arena? When are those going to be paid?
You know, that came to my mind when I said that, and I forgot to pass that along. The last payment is November 2023, so that's our 2024 fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good question.
Okay, and this kind of sums it all up. It takes the total revenues, total expenditures, and what it's showing for the current year plus the next 2 years is that we have a balanced budget with revenues equaling expenditures. The third year of the projection, which is fiscal year 23-24, that's when we start to see the budget have a structural problem where there's 571,000 more expenditures than revenue. Then it goes up to 765 and then to 720. Those last 2 years, the DTE are the last 2 years of the DTE appeal, and the taxable value is the same in both those years. There's no reduction in 25-26, it stays flat. So that's one of the reasons that number also kind of goes down a little bit. For the projection, property taxes were estimated to go up 2% a year, so that's kind of what we're looking at as a estimate of our revenue that's included in here. But then it shows how that either revenue over or under expenditure affects fund balance. Where we're at right now, we're just short of $7 million in fund balance, total fund balance. That does include the $2.2 million that we set aside to deal with the DTE appeal effects. It does not include the budget stabilization fund. So if you take that and run that across, you can see that by the end of it, we would be down to still $4.9 million in fund balance. And then the line below that shows that if we did take those amounts, negative amounts out of the fund balance assignment that we've set aside, the $2.2 million, it shows that by the end of that 5-year period, it would be down to around $142,000. So fund balance in total is about around, it ranges anywhere from 30 to 35%. It does end up getting down to 23% in that last year. If you take the assignment out, that's what that second to the bottom line is there, but still remains around 22-23% through that whole time period. But then the bottom line adds in the $2 million that's in the budget stabilization fund and shows what the fund balance would be throughout all those years. So we hope we don't have to spend that reserve money to balance the budget. It is there, and the fund balance looks like it would still be healthy, but we hope to find a better solution than that and be able to put that fund balance money to work for different reasons.
From the administration standpoint, obviously, we've got to start looking at how we're going to deal with those negative numbers. It just, as you can see how quickly a fund balance can go unless unless there's a plan to address it. So you got, it starts in not this upcoming fiscal year or the next, but the year after, and it gets pretty sizable pretty quick. And so the sooner we can get our arms around that and get that resolved, I think the better for all. So we've got some more discussion, and I really do think that this, from the standpoint of presenting the budget tonight, is really the most important aspect of, what we need to take away from the budget. Again, it's put together, pretty much as the structure has had it with some minor changes, but that's the benefit of, doing the 5-year forecast. You get a real sense of, the direction that we're headed.
Thanks, Vince. John, you have a question?
Thanks, Mayor. Vince, Ed, I'm assuming the budget does not include any projection for new investment growth in the tax base.
Correct. It does not. It did look at if there were industrial facilities, tax exemption certificates that were expiring. It did look at that, but it is not projecting any new growth, no.
Okay. Thanks.
Well, I think you did put a couple % for non-DTE growth, right?
Yeah, but no new developments or anything like that.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
And it did, the DT, or not DT, but the Lazy Boy Renaissance Zone, this coming year, they'll be at paying 50% of the, based on 50% of the taxable value, and 25% per year after that. So that's factored in there as well.
I actually calculated, just to give the sense of how many new, just for using housing units, you needed several hundred $300,000 homes just to make up the gap. Pretty sizable in a 3-year period to do that. But it's there for illustration purposes. I can go back and recalculate it. I was actually working off a higher deficit number, and when I finally saw Ed's final projections, I ratcheted back a little bit. But it's a sizable amount to get to.
But it doesn't include any commercial development or any industrial development that.
It does not. Nope,
Okay.
not at this time.
Okay, should I move on?
Yep, I don't see any other hands at this point. So yes, Ed, please do.
Okay, so that's it really for the general fund. I was going to cover a few of the non-general fund budgets real quick here. Major and local street fund. I think we talked a lot about capital, so we didn't put a lot about capital improvement program budget in here. But all of the, again, that should be 21-22, all 21-22 capital improvement programs projects that were included in the plan are funded. The fund balance remains adequate. The one thing we do run into, kind of knew it for quite some time and have been working on trying to solve it, is that when we started advancing some of these new projects, because of the additional millage funding into this fiscal year, it strains the cash flow available in the major and local street funds. So there is a big transfer from the major street fund to the local street fund to just make sure we cover our cash flow in each of those funds adequately for this coming year. But that'll be a struggle to keep doing that going forward. We were able to do it this year, and we'll look at it on an annual basis to see if we're able to continue doing that. But it will be a struggle, something we'll be dealing with going forward if we keep advancing projects into the new year, because basically we're covering projects that millage was meant to fund, and that millage money really isn't available to us as the revenue until July 1st, the way the accounting rules work. So that's why we're covering those cash flow short term until that millage money comes in. And then the Act 51 revenue is budgeted at an estimate that MDOT did as of February 11th. They're generally projecting about a 3% increase over the next few years. So that's what's budgeted there. The refuse fund. So the millage, we already talked about that a little bit. It's recommended to increase to 2.0155 mils from what this year was 1.702. Last year, when we did the budget projection, we were projecting 1.965. So not a lot higher from where it was last year. But then it's what it's showing there in the future years is based on the budget projection and the projection of taxable value, what it would be estimated to go to in 2022-23 and 2023-24. Generally try to keep the fund balance above $50,000 by the end of that time period, 6/30/24. So it's projected right now to be at 52,635. But included in each budget year is $50,000 of contingency. So if that money doesn't get spent, then these millage numbers can be adjusted, and those fund balance numbers can be adjusted. So that's what's generally in the refuse fund. Okay, and then the parking fund. Last year when we did this, we were actually projecting a budget deficit, fund balance deficit by the end of the third year, and like I said, it's difficult to project where revenues are going to go with COVID reducing the need for people to park and so on. But when we were meeting to talk about the fund and to talk about some other parking issues, one of the things that for me sort of came out of the discussion was that it's pretty easy for somebody right now to just pay a ticket for the full day. and they'd be paying about the same amount as if they fed the meter all day. So I personally thought there should be a little bit more of a penalty to that than there currently is. So that's one of the reasons that we're increasing the fine from $10 to $20. But also in general, the fund does need additional revenue going forward if it's going to continue to fund a full-time parking enforcement officer and a couple of police cadets to do the enforcement.
Yeah, did you incorporate the increase in the fine into the ordinance?
Yes, I did.
Okay, yeah. About a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, Mr. Sell, Clerk Treasurer Lavoy, Chief McCormick, Captain Tolstead, we had a conversation and talking about, now that the pandemic is looks to be coming toward an end, that we're planning on increasing the enforcement end of it. But again, the discussion was at $10, people will pay that much to park in a downtown all day long and gladly. So, we recognize we need to increase that fine and do a little bit more analysis as to some of the other alternatives.
Okay.
Okay. I see nothing. Ed, go ahead.
This is where Barry would pick up now. I guess the other thing that I would point out is, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Vince, but we're planning to have Annette Knowles at the April 5th work session for City Council to present the DDA budget.
Right. Yep.
So I haven't included anything here on that. And I did send out the other fund report today of all those other funds. If there's anything in there that anybody would like to ask or talk about, I'd be happy to talk about it or get you some information on it in the future if you need it. But as of now, that's the end of my presentation.
Okay, Ed, thanks. I'll see if there's any questions, follow-ups for Ed at this time before we get into Mr. Leroy's. No hands are raised. All right. Vince, unless you have something, we'll move on to Barry.
Nope, let's go on to Barry.
All right.
Good evening, everybody. Okay, so this is just a highlight of our goals. As Ed pointed out, we're planning on maintaining our staffing for all operations and projects. We're starting in wastewater. And so in wastewater, we have a couple of regulatory requirements that are coming, that we're continuing on. Completing our year 2 corrective action plan. It's a 10-year program that's required in our upcoming permit. And in our current one, we'll be doing various activities that are listed. Plus, we'll be expecting our NPDS permit coming out, and it does have a few requirements, including the corrective action plan. The EPA is currently reviewing our draft. We'll continue to work on our capital improvement program. And there's a couple other measures of infiltration removal and educating customers on various things, including sewer backup mitigation. Next slide, Ed. This slide is just showing the revenue and expenses. The red text is the original budget for the current fiscal year we're in, and our projected budget. It's slightly reduced. We did migrate some operating projects into capital improvements, and then our requested budget is slightly less than that with some reductions in the budget. And the bottom is just showing the graphic of the revenue is very close to the expenses, which is what we use our rate model for. So the funds are adequate moving forward. Next slide, Ed. This slide just shows the overall budget. There's some increases in some areas, and then there's also decreases. They balance out nicely. And there's some specific areas of concern that just paying attention to. And again, they balance out very well. Next slide, Ed. As far as the rates, one thing to point out is the last fiscal year usage was slightly higher, about 1.7% increase compared to what we were expecting, with a slight decrease based on our historical averages, I guess, we've been observing. And so, overall usage is still down compared to our banner year, fiscal year 2008. And we did keep in the rate model of a decrease in usage. But at this point, funds are adequate to maintain operations and capital improvements and desired reserves that we're recommending no rate increase at this point. Next slide. This is just showing the usage trend, and it's been adjusted for based on last year's usage and our current projections, which are still looking pretty stable at this point. Our last round of billing. Next slide, Ed. And this is our regional comparison that's been updated. We're still we're in the top 9. And as I point out, typically every year, a lot of the smaller systems in the top 9, most are collection systems, which don't have the plant, but they do have industrial base. But there's a lot of smaller facilities that don't have the infrastructure that we have to maintain. Adrian is probably the most comparable that has similar characteristics with our wastewater system. So we're very competitive with the rates and still able to cover all our operational costs as well. And yep, go ahead.
Barry, John, question? So you're too far away from a slide or a question?
No, that's fine. Thanks, Mayor. Barry, with the previous slide showed the usage going down, or it appears to me that there's been a lot of housing growth that has occurred in like Monroe and Frenchtown and parts of Raisinville Township. Why is the wastewater usage going down when there are new homes in the metropolitan area being built and coming online?
It's a slight shift in high industrial use going down, and less water use with regard to like fixture use overall is what we're observing. So there's just a change in characteristic and how wastewater is being used overall.
Okay, thanks.
Brian, question?
Yes, thank you, Barry. Could a good portion of that be attributed to DTE? Because I think that they're using
as far as DTE, they're from their plant facility, they get billed on a monthly basis for their usage. So if they use, like, on average, almost over, in some cases, well over 1 million gallons of potable water a day. But their average use is just a fraction of that because of evaporation and different uses within their treatment process. But they also have their own NPDES permit. So they draw obviously a lot of water in from the river for their plant to generate power. Now we also do get their wastewater effluent from that, but it's not an industrial discharge that they treat it down to a normal domestic house sewage level. They don't violate our local limits, but yeah, it's a significant fraction of that. But we haven't noticed any reduction in their wastewater primarily.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, Barry, I'll see you in your hands. Continue, please.
All right. I would just want to point out, so back to the wastewater control board did approve the rates to maintain the existing rates for the next fiscal year last Thursday. So anyway, that's all I wanted to mention on this slide. Thanks, Ed. Okay, so moving on to the water, we have, as far as our goals, the lead and copper rule is a lot of work with the water system, and there's some good information here. We still have to finish our field verifications, which means we're physically out in the field, hydro excavating services, but we're also doing a lot of paperwork with regard to investigating existing records we have. So one thing to point out is we're about 77% reduced from our original assessment like 3 years ago. So we're down to about a little over 600 locations that we need to finish verifying information. They do allow you 5 years to do it, but we're planning to be done next fiscal year. As far as the number of services that are suspected lead or galvanized, we're under 2,000 now. We're down to about 1,900. That's about 95 a year. So we're about 56% reduced from our original assessment as well. So that's some good news. As far as, we still have challenges. There's a MCL now with PFAS. So we're doing monthly monitoring right now through a program with the state, and algal blooms is also currently a regulatory item of concern with the U.S. government. So we're working with regulators on doing all the appropriate testing for that. So as far as our meter conversion program that we convert customers by billing cycle every year, there's usually 2 cycles we handle. We're currently going to be converting cycle 1 and 2 to monthly billing in April, and we'll finish meter conversions on that, so like those 2 cycles by the end of June, and we'll move into year 3, which is cycles 3 and 4. It's about 2,400 meters, so we'll need a little assistance from a contractor to help us convert all those customers' meters as well. It's an 8-year program total, and we're on par at this point. As Ed pointed out, we do have 1 reduction in staff, so we'll maintain that. We have an upcoming retirement we expected, so which wouldn't allow us to have an apprentice. So we'll maintain that staffing level. And as far as funds, with maintaining the rates, there's 3 fiscal years shown here. We're recommending no rate increase on the water for fiscal year 21-22, and slight increases over the next 2 fiscal years. This is just a snapshot of the last few years, as well as the projected and requested. Revenues and expenses are very close again, and the projected is slightly elevated. We've had some emergency repairs at the water plant on a few projects, and we have some increases in renewal costs, service renewal costs, and the meters as well. Next slide, Ed.
You've got a question for Michelle?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mary, if you just before we move on, Michelle Germani. I think that's where the hand was. You're muted, Michelle.
I'm muted.
There you go.
I am.
You're good.
So sorry. Barry, the meter replacements, they're just for residential and not for retail or industrial?
So year 1, which was in fiscal year 2020, included all the customers that were not residential. So they're already converted to the new system and on monthly billing. So going forward, all other customers are residential, yes.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think the significant thing to lose, related to that is that with the industrial and commercial and municipal customers, you've got better than half your revenues are on the updated meters. So that was the rationale for taking that approach. So
correct.
Thank you. Any other questions right now? All right, Barry, continue, please.
Okay, so funds are adequate right now for where we stand. As far as expenditures, there's a couple of areas of concern, but there's decreases in debt service and fringe benefits. The refinancing bonds that were approved by City Council last year helped bring that down, so that's a good sign. Much appreciated. And there's a few specific areas with increases and decreases as well, but it's pretty well balanced. Next slide, Ed.
you want to talk just a little bit about the reimbursement fees? Ed and Barry, Michelle?
Are we talking about city fees, or which reimbursement fees?
Well, the reimbursement fees being the electronic payments.
Oh, the transaction fees, yes. So those, yeah, I'm not sure who you want to take the lead on that.
I can just explain what we did. I guess that'd maybe be a good first start. Last year when the pandemic started, one of the things that the City Council did and approved in one of its resolutions was to waive fees on online payments through our new service provider, pretty new service provider at that point, which was Invoice Cloud. And so we had fees waived throughout for everything except for really property taxes throughout the pandemic, and still do. But one of the things that we talked about is that if we're going to still do this, we really ought to just move to that model for good, because we could save over 50% in fees from what we were paying just by absorbing what the customer would pay. So I want to say we kind of approved going to that model in October of last year, but it took quite a while to get to that point where it was in around the first or second week of February before we finally implemented what they call the fully absorbed fee model. So if you were to look at all of our payment types that are available to be made online, except for winter and summer taxes and personal property taxes, delinquent personal property taxes, everything else comes with no convenience fee to the citizen or customer at this point. And we haven't even received our full month's billing yet, but the first month was maybe 2/3 of a month at that new level, and it had already reduced our monthly fees by 50%. So that's where we stand at this point, and are looking to stay there going forward.
I think that's just one of those customer service where we encourage people to do more online type of transactions, and it's just now it's getting incorporated as the cost of doing business for the department. So that's why I had to bring it up, is I just wanted to reinforce that.
And it's a good point to bring it up right here, because of all the payments we get, water and sewer payments are by far the highest volume, and the fees that we end up paying are built right into the water and wastewater budgets to fund those.
Right. With the reduced, fully absorbed model now, they're significantly reduced too. So that's those costs are built into the model now.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, Ed, next slide. So our proposed rates for the next fiscal year, we're proposing no rate increase. With building it into the rate model and the projection with the consumption, which will be the next slide, about 93% of the system is still below like a 2006 banner year. But one thing to point out is last calendar year, billed usage was up almost 15%, primarily due to COVID and a hotter environment. But that hasn't happened in a long time. So, but I wanted to at least point that out. Next slide, Ed. These are the rates that are proposed. It does have our latest agreements built into it with City of Petersburg. Next slide, Ed. And these are our fire line rates by meter size, as well as system development fees, which we propose to maintain. Next slide. And then this is our regional comparison, normalized for. Ooh.
Sorry, a little quick on the click there.
No problem. Hopefully I'm not past my 5 minutes. Anyway, City of Monroe's in the top 5, and then our customers outside the city limits are also listed there. We are certainly within our affordability range for the US EPA medium household income model, as well as the case study that we follow with Atlanta, Georgia's. They use a second quintile model, and like I said, we're certainly within the affordability range with that. Next slide. And then this is just a snapshot of the consumption over time, and you can see we've slightly increased, but we did build in the flat regressive slope going forward, just to monitor and maintain our historical observation. So next slide. That's all I had.
Thank you, Barry. I'll see if there's any follow-up questions, council members. Any inquiries? I don't see any. Thanks again, Barry and Ed. Vince, I guess, oh wait, there's a question up. John.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Barry, what's the status of the proposed water project out in, what is that, in London Township?
Yeah, so London Township, they filed for a drinking water asset management grant to convert their existing wells over to a public system. And on top of that, they're also doing a PER with looking at a long-term financing loan from USDA, similar to what Petersburg did. So it's a project that's moving slow, but if they can get it into the affordability range, they want to get it into about a $20,000 SAD cost buy-in for each of one of their potential customers. Then we'll likely have a project to move forward with.
Would that be another wholesale contract?
We looked at three options. One was a wholesale option, and we looked at full retail, where the city would be responsible for maintaining the system and replacement costs. And then we looked at a hybrid option, which is the city maintaining and operating and billing, but not paying for a replacement cost. And at the time when we met with their water citizen committee, they seemed to really like the last option, the hybrid option, because the multiplier is significantly higher than what our existing agreement is with them versus the retail. So they like the hybrid, which is a lower multiplier, but they would have to replace, when the time comes to replace the system, they would have to pay for the replacement cost.
Okay, thanks.
Very good. Other questions for Barry? Water or wastewater? So Barry, the last control board received this information, and just any update there, I guess, just for the council's awareness. I know the Councilwoman Germaine and I attended that, but
right. So as far as the rates, they approved the rates and to maintain the current rate system that's in place. And then other items on the agenda were discussed were the corrective action plan certification fee. And as I pointed out, that's like a 10-year program of improvements, and then there's a 2-year follow-up study that we have to perform. And the certification fee, we're currently, the board recommended having a rate consultant review and come back with their recommendation, so for every new connection that comes in the system, whether it's in City of Monroe, Frenchtown Township, or Monroe Township, or even Raisonville, there would be a certification fee that would have to be paid on top of all the other fees. So water system development fees or any assessments that Frenchtown or Monroe Town have, it would be on top of it. And the whole point of the fee would be to help reimburse the project cost to help remove inflow and infiltration from the system while we're going through this corrective action plan. And it's based on meter size. So if a large meter for a industrial development comes in, and it would be charged appropriately, scaled up like our current system development fees are.
thanks, Barry. I only bring it up and asked to review that because when you look at the wastewater control board, transition within the township, new supervisor, new trustees, and there's a change in one of the positions in Monroe Township. So we have half of the board is new, and it's a lot of information, a lot to catch up with. But I will say that the conversations are going very well. They're very productive, a lot of good questions, and we're trying to bring the board along to understand from the agreement right on through terminology, as well as the whole information you received tonight in detail. So I just wanted to pass on to council. I think it's progressing well, and I think there's very good communication with our partners regarding the wastewater control. Thanks. See if there's other questions. All right, I don't see anything for you, Barry. Thank you. Appreciate it. We'll go back to Mr. Pastu. You're, I guess.
You still there?
Yeah, we're here.
Okay.
I know you're
I
looking.
thought I disconnected myself. I apologize.
No, you had that look, so I think, and you're looking for something there.
Yes.
We're still here.
I thought he was frozen.
Yeah, no, I was stunned for a moment. Part of the reason for doing tonight's, I think, we may have been able to cover this in a work session, the proposed budget, given the few changes that are contemplated. But, with what's come out recently with the American Recovery Plan Act, I thought, we need to start just talking, because I know there's a lot of discussion out there, and from my end of it is just lay out what we know and also what we don't know, but also I think to talk about where we need to go once we get some finalized. So if you look at the projected amount there, item 1, we've gotten word approximately 11.4 million. Again, you're going to hear this over and over again, subject to U.S. Department of Treasury regulations. They do have some latitude in interpretation of their legislation, but from what we've heard as an entitlement community, that the city of Monroe would be receiving that amount. The timing associated with it, 2 equal tranches with that, roughly 5.7 million each. Again, the first bullet, Department of Treasury issues its guidelines and local government allotments. So there's still confirmation awaiting that. We anticipate that we should hear probably by mid to late April regarding that, because the first distribution is scheduled for no later than May 10th of this year. And since we are an entitlement community, we anticipate that we would receive those funds directly, whereas non-entitlement communities in Michigan, the money goes to the state, and then they've got, if I recall, roughly 30 to 45 days to distribute to the local jurisdictions. The second distribution would have to take place by March 11th of 2022. And then the other timing consideration is all funds must be spent or on costs incurred on or before December 31st of 2024. So roughly you're looking at a little over 3 years that you would have to spend the proceeds once the 3.5 years since they've been issued, which may seem like a long time, but depending on what type of project or program that you're involved with, it may take that while. So the next section just deals with let me pull my screen up. But Mayor, if you see anybody with questions, just let me know.
Yep.
The next is the use of funds. Again, you'll see throughout, subject to U.S. Department of Treasury regulations to be issued. But the first bullet is, respond to COVID-19 emergency and address its economic effects, including through aid to households, small businesses, nonprofits, and impacted industries such as tourism and hospitality. That's one of the uses spelled out in the legislation, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. Premium pay for essential employees of state or local government can max out at $25,000 per worker. Again, I think that's something that we would have to talk about as part of the collective bargaining process, of which all 6 contracts are due June 30th or expire June 30th of this year. Provide government services to the extent any revenue reduction resulting from COVID-19. Ed was starting to take a look at this. Last Friday, we got some word that they're still probably better to wait and see what the definition of how they define revenue reduction. But that may be something, I think, for example, we know that, there was a reduction last fiscal year in our state revenue sharing. Do you include the revenue loss that's come from our parking enforcement fund, those type of things, we'll have to understand and evaluate. Make investment in water, sewer, broadband infrastructure, in bold, emphasis added. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Local governments may transfer funds to private nonprofit groups, public benefit corporations involved in passenger or cargo transportation, and special use or state or local governments. Special use would be internally, brownfield authority, corridor improvement authority, downtown development authority, that type of thing. And I think with public transportation, maybe LETC would fit into that category as well. What we know as far as prohibited uses, local governments can't use the funds to make pension payments. We not that it's based on what Mr. Sell was talking about, we don't have to worry about our OPEB with the Medicare Advantage. And once that actuarial valuation comes in, we'll likely be overfunded in our retiree health care. Can't be used for road projects. And from what we understand is that that there's an interest in another infrastructure bill that would be separate from this. This is a COVID-19 recovery, but a separate infrastructure bill that would involve road funding as well. And the funds can't be used to offset revenue losses resulting from a tax cut, tax delay, or rebate after March 3rd of 2021. The one-time, the recommended approach is this is obviously a one-time source of revenues. I think it's important for us to think strategically, along with long-term sustainability with these funds. How does this fit into, the long view of things here in the community? One of the things I'll talk about and give you an example is reallocate existing program CIP revenues or resources to other projects where feasible. Play it, use what the rules of engagement are to your advantage. And again, in the context of thinking strategically how we can leverage that what it is, and then leverage proceeds for other investments or ongoing revenue generation. There's a lot of things that we can think about in that context, and certainly talking about broadband, how that may fit into, serving either a needed area and or underserved area as well. So U.S. Department of Treasury regulations, again, we anticipate mid-April, May 1. We want to make sure we can confirm the allotment. 2, the definition of what constitute a revenue reduction, as I mentioned earlier. Also, just there was some vagary from what Mr. Cochran and Sell were telling me last Friday with one of the sessions, whether that includes stormwater or not. And then confirm a road replacement eligibility for underground utilities. So if you do a water or sewer project, obviously in a lot of cases, it's underneath the pavement of which you have to remove for that. So before I go into talking a little bit about St. Mary's Garden project, is there any questions yet?
See if there's any questions from council at this point. And we got Vince got a few more items he wants to review related to the American Rescue Act.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
Now I'm going to use St. Mary's Garden project as a recommended use and a walkthrough as to the rationale behind it. Patrick is estimating roughly about 4 million. We'll put it at 4 to 5 million. Patrick did a takeoff on the recommended design as presented by Spicer Engineering that included the quantities. Patrick used those quantities with current unit prices and built in some cost escalators as well with that. So we're pretty confident that those numbers are going to give you a good idea what we're looking at. But it is a project that's ready for design and could be bid as early as mid-late fall. So if we were to move forward with it, this is a project that we could get out on the street, take advantage of it before everybody else starts doing some work. But the stormwater design accomplishes, it does allow for a footing and roof drain disconnects benefiting the sanitary corrective action plan that Barry talked a little bit about. With that, that would be the conveyance of the clear water from the footing drains as well as any roof drains that are connected. But it also addresses, although misspelled, street and backyard flooding, which has been a problem up in that area. So based on the design engineering working with Spicer, that it's designed to handle those, It's a 10-year, a modified 10-year, as the term was used, 1-year event. And if need be, I talked with, as to why it wasn't a 25-year, 24 event. Part of it is many of the complexities with existing utilities, leads, and just candidly the lack of soils here, rock base that we have. So it's there's some challenges, and again, that's something Patrick can expound upon if need be. The other thing, the reason I like this project, it's we're an entitlement designated community that's inclusive of Monroe and Frenchtown Township, of which both are members of the Metropolitan Sewer Authority that has this corrective action plan. And the funding certainly would be within the spirit of that entitlement, as well as the need identified with the corrective action plan. The project would involve a substantial pavement removal for storm lines and sewer leads, which means you don't necessarily need to spend the money from the road millage, of which was being planned for in 2022. And again, this is where it goes into trying to look at projects and how you can take existing projects that you are planning on and redeploying some of those funds. In this case, we were looking at putting 2.5 million, most likely to do some financing with it. And then, as Ed mentioned, we've put aside some money from the personal property tax reimbursement. The second portion of it, which is always very mysterious from the state and which we're uncomfortable using on an ongoing basis, except for one-time type of expenditures. We were looking at we put a $500,000 in if we did another $500,000 here in May or June when it comes out, and then even the following year. So you would have almost $4 million in there. And the significance of it is that you can utilize that for other types of projects. And I'm going to throw one out there. I want to get the mindset going, okay? When I say this, but like, for example, the personal property tax reimbursement. I had no idea. I mean, we're doing this Navarre Library Opportunity Center study of, program uses, space analysis, and, looking at the CDBG program that we have essentially $350,000 unallocated yet for projects this upcoming year. And if you did 2 years of that, guess what? Now you got $2 million. You could actually, and that's what I want to start, get us to think in those type of terms, is how you can start utilizing some of this. In the case of the road millage, you can use that for moving up the scheduled projects for 2023 into the 2022 construction. You can use obviously a portion of it for trail development that could be leveraged with grants. And again, the term leverage is phenomenally important in how we can maximize the use of these projects. So I use that as an example. Right now we're ready to go with the design related to this to get it started. Council did authorize, I think it was 90,000 to start the design once it was ready. We're at the point where they're ready to actually take some soil borings at this point in time, do some further analysis. And so, just final thoughts on it, just other considerations. I think it would be beneficial to wait till mid-April to understand the uses as U.S. Treasury issues their guidelines. But also today with the MML, if you get approached, and you may very well, funding is going to be provided for other needs such as small business assistance, human resource service needs, or even family assistance. And so early on, I was contemplating, for example, small business assistance, maybe we put an allocation aside for a program that could be administered by the Monroe County BDC for small businesses here in the community. Any social or human service needs, maybe if there was a set aside. But with the MML program today, they kind of just said, just wait and see what comes out of that, because there's other funding that's going to be earmarked for some of those needs. And then again, I think part of it is do we consider a revised CIP based on the on this process. So I put those out for quick consideration. I was ready to send you about a 3 or 4 page memo on Friday and got a little hesitant based on Mr. Cochran and Sel's comments. But I thought, you know what, let's just lay out what we know and, you know, what we think we might want to do going forward. So I put that out there for thoughts, comments, questions.
See if there's any questions from council. I was able to join in on the MML's review today. If anybody didn't, I'm sure it'll come back up again. But I think one of the last comments that Vince mentioned there at the beginning is, you know, we're going to get many requests, many thoughts from whether it be residents, business, or otherwise. But one of the things they stressed was, of course, you know, there's time. It's not we have till 2024. Take a thoughtful process to it. But one of the things they said is to think about what's being asked, but direct to those current resources that are available. I think Vince touched on that as well. You know, it's because you know, there's opportunities that are currently present that might get some of the requests needs met immediately, and then we can continue through the I'll just say the planning process of what we do. So a couple of hands, John, and then to Brian.
Thanks, Mayor. I guess my comment is I'd like to have more time to really strategize on this, because this is kind of like a real opportunity to put some of the money, if we're allowed to, into what I would term quality of life projects that are going to be used for the next 15 or 20 years by the overall community. If we're allowed to do that. We tend to put a lot of our CIP money underground and on pavement. And with the projected decline of taxable value from DTE in the next 3 to 10 years, some of the projects that are never going to get built in the city are going to be quality of life projects. They're just not going to happen. So when, you know, if we have this access to this type of funding, I'm all about leveraging it, but I would really hope that we think about putting it into projects that are going to be here and used by a majority of the residents in the community. That's my comment.
Thanks, John. I think it's kind of the theme that we're hearing. And what can we do that's transformational? What is something that's going to be, as you said, 15 years later, say, look, this is something that was accomplished when the opportunity was there, and it wasn't going to happen otherwise. I know Clerk Treasurer Lavoie was on one of those calls, or MML presentations as well, and might have some thoughts as well, because we've chatted about it. Brian, go ahead.
Thank you. I think it is prudent to wait and find out exactly what we can do from the Fed. And the other thing is, basically flipping funds from one to the other. I agree with that. I think that's wise to be able to finish up some of these other projects and really putting forth something that can be lifelong is good for the city of Monroe.
Right.
And if we can utilize some of this money that's going to fend off some of the losses that we're going to get from other places, I'm in total agreement to that. But let's not put the cart before the horse. Let's see where we're going to be at with the Fed and see what they're going to allow us to do. And I think that's the wisest thing to do, is give it a month to sit and see where we're at.
Thanks, Brian. I think I see, and I think hearing from council as well as, there is time, and this will be an opportunity for a discussion just like today. We have the budget, but this is about really thinking about projects and transformational and really changing kind of the face of some things. So I'll see if there's any other comments. Michelle Germaini, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just want to agree with John and Brian with we have to be smart in allocating this money and be wise about how we distribute it. So I think waiting and seeing how it all pans out will be to our benefit.
Thank you. I know Mr. Pastu in this conversation, we if you haven't been contacted, you're going to be. And the idea is you take the information as it comes in, but staying with this kind of a thought process, there's plenty of time, and there's really the thoughtfulness has already been said, I think, is important. Michelle, I don't know if you want to add a comment, 'cause I know you, we chatted some things even internally, but how we can transform some of the things that we haven't done haven't been able to, I should say. And then also maybe your thought on the one you participated in.
Well, I think a lot of it's been said, but yeah, it was framed as finally an investment in our communities, and I couldn't agree more. So while I understand we'll have to do some practical things with it, John, I think you articulated what the conversations I've had about it as well. You know, this is an opportunity for a transformational project that'll benefit our residents for years to come. And hopefully we'll be able to put it in something that will leverage and will result in some further economic development. And, you know, it'll be this investment, hopefully with whatever choices we make, will be renewed on a constant basis by way of what we choose to do with it. So, you know, either in terms of pure monetary comebacks or, you know, just growth of population, et cetera. Just a really good opportunity. And I'm glad to see we're going to be thoughtful about it.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
Other comments from council members? I don't see any other hands at this time. Vince, I don't know if you want to kind of go back and review or
No,
just
it's,
comments you may have.
I'm very, very comfortable with what I'm hearing. Obviously, it's a major amount of money and does require, I think, a lot of forethought as to how we will utilize that, and how we can maximize and leverage it to the, you know, fullest extent, taking the long view of our, you know, what's in the best interest of the community. So do you want me to send this out loud to you, or?
I think so. It'd be good to hold on to it, and as council receives it, just notes that could be jotted down or thoughts for the future conversation as a start point. I think it's great. Then we can progress from there, and an opportunity when it comes up to meet again, as we all said, once we hear a little bit more from Treasury on I'll say usages as well as structure. That'd be great.
Well, I appreciate that, you know, given an opportunity. Sometimes my fear is that somebody will get in front of you before I do. And so this is one of those, okay, here's what we know, and let's start thinking about it. So I greatly appreciate it. So
Very good.
I have nothing else though, Your Honor.
Okay, thanks. I'll just go back to council, see if there's any questions on the work session from beginning to close here, whether it be on budget items or thoughts for Vince now. If not, I know that I'll be coming back around the 1st of April as we said, for the first meeting, reading, and public hearing. Any questions from council members on any item at all, budget wise?
I
Nice
just want to say
presentation.
good job.
Yeah. And the Rescue Act as well. So yeah, thanks, John. I agree. It's a good presentation for everybody, from everybody. All right. I don't see any hands, so I think that at this time, nothing further. We'll go ahead and at this time we'll adjourn and close the work session. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you here in a couple weeks.
Good. Everybody.
Thank you.
Good evening. Stay safe, healthy.
Yep.
Yep.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.